I have a list of questions, and right now I'll read out those that are specifically about airships. Afterwards, I can answer the rest myself, those related to Solar Group. Actually, there are several questions, and I'll even group them together. They're asking about the cost price of the airship, questions about its estimated payback period, whether we have any specific detailed calculations available, or perhaps if such crucial information is publicly available somewhere, can we utilize any relevant information on this important matter?
Of course, we absolutely do. This isn't some entirely new, unfamiliar device with unclear functions and uncertain consumer qualities. It's a very well-known, established product that performs a clear, essential function. And there is a significant market for which this particular product with its specific and valuable functions is indeed intended. It turns out that in the current global situation, the capitalist or market economy model, whichever, is the more precisely correct term to use, is the one where consumer demand profoundly shapes the available supply. In other words, it's not like I just make something and then say I want it to cost a certain amount. Number right now, there is a market situation. If we enter the service sector, say transport and logistics, we have to meet the expectations of that market. We can say that we'll transport a ton for a higher price or take longer. There are certain expectations, and it's to meet these expectations that devices are created. So we can make it out of incredibly cool, super expensive materials with some incomprehensible features and properties. That is, from the very beginning, all development and design is carried out in such a way that the device is within the market. Within the broader market, for those individuals who are specifically engaged in these essential transport and logistics businesses, for example, this is particularly relevant. In other words, there is a clear request from them. If we can solve certain tasks using your devices, we will buy them. So our primary task is to ensure the overall cost of the entire process together with the company's profit margin in such a way that we make money and the device ultimately meets the consumer's expectations. In this regard, what other economic model could there be? It is shaped by the market, not by us. But what we can develop is only a strategy. And the strategy is, for example, if we start producing small airships now, that is unmanned aerial vehicles, they also have a clear, understandable market. If you lift, say, 50 kilograms and carry them for 100 kilometers, that's one type of device. If it's 200 or more, that's a different type of device. These devices have different costs. And so, for example, it's clear that we will set the production cost of the device so that these devices are in the market, so to speak, and we can make some profit from them. But for example, we can't set a high profit margin on the smaller devices because then they would no longer be in the market. And low profit on small devices is an obvious fact. Good profit on medium devices is also an obvious fact. And truly huge profitability on large devices is also an obvious and undeniable fact. And that's indeed the plan, or rather the strategy we are diligently following. Many companies that are also being set up as startups and are making small airships build their economic model on the idea that small devices will pay off the process of forming the company itself, meaning the startup itself. But this immediately makes it unprofitable. So here, of course, not every small airship is built and launched indiscriminately. It's good that we've taken a broad look at the whole industry. So the strategy is this: undercut prices on small devices and then make up for it with the larger ones. Because, for example, the price at which the Nova 35 airships, let's say the 10-ton models, will be sold is such that just one full year of serial production and subsequent deployment will more than adequately pay back all initial investments. You don't need to be a genius or write brilliant business plans. An airship is a unique means of transportation with unique capabilities. If it's made with good quality and sold at very reasonable market prices, it will fly off the shelves like hotcakes.
By the way, I've actually seen some specific calculations myself. I don't know, we don't publish them simply because those aren't our vehicles. Maybe it makes sense for us to publish the calculations we did even for the Atlanta. I've seen those calculations, for example.
There are economic models that clearly show you can build an airship and get rich. If we truly need to make them public, then let's proceed to publish them. There are tons of works, tons of studies. The same goes for the Moscow Aviation Institute. They also have an economics department there. A well-known specialist we know works at that particular department. He even wrote a separate program for automatically creating detailed business plans for the serial production of airships. So there aren't just mathematical models, but even sophisticated software for writing business plans. But what's the actual use of this software if there's no actual craft yet? Alexander Nikolaevich Kirillin also has a lot of macroeconomic research on the integration of airships into the transport and logistics system. There too, the profits are in the trillions, billions, and so large that frankly it's hard to even imagine them. There's a book by Alexander Nikolaevich Kirillin, a monograph. You can find it online and read it, and everything will become clear. We made our first little airship, the Nova 01. We didn't plan to make it. It turned out as a small model of the Nova 2 airship. We demonstrated it could fly, and we found a customer for these small advertising airships. We hoped for something like this, but understood this is how it would turn out. Are we ready for mass production at reasonable prices? Yes, we are. Everything's calculated. How much will we earn? We'll make a profit, but as I said, the margin on small devices will be small. But the fact we'll be involved in business and making some profit will show we're in the market and capable of solving this task not only technically but also economically. If the devices are larger, it will be the same story. That particular client who came for devices with a capacity of 8,000 cubic meters, for example, needs an entire fleet, so to speak. Naturally, when developing and mass producing these devices, we will factor in the profit there. The profit margin on this device will already reach. That is, if for the smaller one, you can factor in profits ranging from a few percent to several dozen percent. Here it will already be truly several dozen percent indeed. For cargo devices, it's hundreds if not thousands of percent. The term business plan is, kind of overused. Everyone repeats it like a mantra, but very few people actually understand what it means. There is a specific business goal. Now, when a specific client appears and says, I need these particular devices in this quantity by this time, that's it. You can plan anything you want. A business plan is like when you find yourself entering a market that's already oversaturated and you're trying to come up with something clever. You try to keep expenses down, arrange supplies, do this and that, juggling things and hope something will take off.
Or when you have some kind of perfect conditions where you know exactly what will happen tomorrow, how much one thing, a third will cost, how much you'll have, I don't know.
And we have perfect conditions. Everyone needs airships, but there are no airships. And basically, we're going to be the trendsetters in this market now. And obviously, you can't act recklessly because by doing so, we'll just scare people off. Like, who else can make you an airship? I'll sell it for $1 trillion billion. You cannot behave in that manner, of course. As we have previously stated, or as I personally mentioned before, the airship market is already well established indeed, the entire aviation and airship market. Everything is very, very expensive, but we have the incredible opportunity to revive it by significantly lowering the price and simply flooding the entire world with airships. And as for making money, please do not worry about that at all.
Next question about the airship. Will it be possible to see it in person? Will there be any demonstrations organized?
Yes, of course, there will be when. It's not clear yet, but most likely we'll definitely do it this summer. But I want to point something out.
The cleverest ones have already managed to visit. Yes, we can show footage now with our African partners who actually attended the tests. Yes, that's right.
Of course, we agreed to let them in since they came, but still these were factory tests and, anything could have happened. Things did not exactly go as originally planned, but honestly, if something had gone terribly wrong, it would have been quite obvious anyway. It's just that the process itself, yes, we needed to organize this demonstration specifically. I mean, we have a production process going on there, and we didn't want to get distracted in the middle of it to put on some kind of demonstration. That's precisely why we're organizing it separately, like a dedicated mini show once we've thoroughly finished all our research on this remarkable little device, and when it starts flying regularly, then we'll set up a dedicated area with a separate program where everything will be well thought out, safe, and rehearsed. And at that point, of course, that's the right time to do it. Come watch, get acquainted.
There's also a question about whether we interested in participating in electrical engineering or electric transport exhibitions in Kazakhstan.
Probably not. I believe that actual flying devices in the sky are the best exhibition.
Well, but if someone still wants to invite AERONOVA somewhere, how can they get in touch?
Look, the question actually sounds like it's meant for the previous project, LLC Sovelmash.
By the way, there are no specific details here. I think the right approach is to contact AERONOVA directly or LLC Sovelmash direct. Anything that can be truly beneficial is of course of interest. You need to consider not exhibitions in general, but a specific exhibition.
Yeah, look, just for the sake of checking a box, of course, we'll take part in some exhibitions, but exhibitions are mainly held to find customers, and as it happens, the airship is its own advertising banner. In fact, you couldn't come up with a better banner than a huge one in the sky above your head. And even with small one, we realized this really works, and our overall strategy is correct. What's point of going to exhibitions, telling people things and making promises? It's easier to launch it into the sky, and everything will take care of itself.
The second version of the Nova 01 will be at the same level of readiness. Can it be certified, approved for flights and commercial operation? Is there any progress in this area?
For small, agile, and increasingly prevalent unmanned aerial vehicles, there is currently a well-defined and established procedure that comprehensively allows you to certify such a UAV in a straightforward, declarative, and officially recognized manner. So yes, it will be certified, and it is planned to be used commercially by those customers who have already come forward and said they would gladly buy a batch and use them for advertising purposes. There are also other customers who specifically want to use them for monitoring purposes. In general, for both groups, we will prepare all of the necessary procedures. In other words, our goal is to resolve all of these issues by the fall.
Nova 01 flies fast tests. Can you share flight information? What is its maximum speed, altitude, payload, etc.?
Well, the altitude is up to 1.5 kilometers, and the maximum speed is around 80 kilometers per hour, although we haven't accelerated it to that speed yet, because generally there is a testing protocol, maximum speed, hard landings, and so on. All of that happens at the end of the testing program for obvious reasons, since you could lose the device. It can fly with a payload of up to 20 kilograms in loitering mode. When it takes on these 20 kilograms and calmly loiters, that is, it's not rushing at maximum speed, but simply cruising smoothly over a designated area, or even just holding a position, it can stay there for up to 10 hours in this mode. In the mode where it takes on those 20 kilograms, turns the cruise propellers to maximum, accelerates to a speed of 80 kilometers per hour, and head somewhere, the battery will basically drain right away. It will fly a maximum of 150 kilometers in that case. Most likely that's with zero wind. If there's a tailwind, it will fly farther, and if there's a headwind, it will cover less distance. Got it. So, but the Nova 01 is not intended for commercial use. The one that will be made for commercial purposes will be a bit faster. It will have more batteries installed, basically. We'll talk about it a bit later once we've assembled it.
Can you tell us how the airship behaves in a crosswind? At what wind speed can it hold its position? How much wind affects its flight characteristics? And at what wind speed the weather become unsuitable for flying?
Well, look, it can stay in the sky in any wind. It can simply match the wind speed, so to speak, and have zero speed relative to the wind. Even if the wind is blowing, say, 100 kilometers per hour, it doesn't matter. If it moves along with this air current, it's not a problem for it, as long as the wind is tailwind, of course. If the task is to hold a position, for example, then it has a maximum calculated speed of just over 80 kilometers per hour. So up to a wind speed of just over 80 kilometers per hour, it can point its nose into the wind and use its propellers to hold its position without any problem. But obviously not for long, because this particular drone, due to its batteries, wasn't designed for that. If it needs to move forward while the wind is blowing from the side, obviously it will travel at an angle. In other words, it won't fly straight like this, but will move with its nose slightly into the wind, maintaining its intended direction. In general, flying a blimp in the wind feels like sailing a boat. Anyone who has sailed before understands that you can even sail against the wind, more or less, with a sailboat. And the logic of piloting a blimp is the same. You don't need to fight the wind if it's coming from the side. You just need to use it correct. To do this, you simply need to fully understand the basic principles and have either good dexterity or the right techniques. Of course, if you just bluntly turn the blimp completely sideways to the strong wind, it will get blown away very strongly. But why do that? On the ground, it should weather vane, meaning it should turn its nose into the wind. And up in there, when it's flying, it should also take the correct position, choose the right course, and adjust according to the current wind and weather conditions. Small blimps, probably up to 15 meters per second, can quite easily take off and land. The bigger the blimp, the more capabilities it has. In fact, for large blimps, takeoff and landing are designed for wind speeds of up to 35 meters per second. That's a storm strong enough to blow roofs of houses. And the main problem for blimps is ground level operation. This specifically concerns takeoff and landing, because when it's up in the air, again, it doesn't really matter what the wind is like. Well, if you get blown a bit in one direction, you just turn slightly, change your course and go around, so to speak. But when you need to dock at a specific point or landing pad, that's when the wind becomes a problem. So large airships can take off and land in winds of about 30 meters per second, give or take. And smaller ones can handle around 15 meters per second. And that's already quite a strong wind. We'll see how it works out in practice, because back when quadcopters first appeared, even the slightest wind would tip them over, but now they can fly calmly in windy conditions in automatic mode. The computer control system and its algorithms give us a bit more freedom in this area. And so far, no one has tried this with airships, but we are going to try and are already working on it. We'll see how much the quality of an aircraft equipped with a brain will improve.
The redistribution of pre-launch share show, does it affect those who took out installment plans and were unable or unwilling to pay them off on time? But here I'll repeat what we've said from the very beginning. Participating in the project at the pre-launch stage is truly a great privilege, because the terms were extremely favorable and they were necessary for the project to launch actively, which in fact is exactly what happened. At the very same time, we previously mentioned that the shares which were sold during the initial pre-launch phase could not be significantly increased in the future under any circumstances. If you abandon your installment plan and stop making payments, it will not be possible to restore these packages. In other words, there were strict limitations which we talked about from the very beginning, and despite this, some people took out installment plans and for various reasons did not complete their payment. According to the original agreement, which we publicly announced and made available to everyone, we put these shares up for sale. That's precisely where they came from. So, for example, if you unfortunately abandoned your installment plan and didn't fully pay it off regrettably, you won't be able to restore it anymore. Your shares were exactly the ones put up for sale as part of the significant promotional campaign announced today. So, if you've changed your mind after watching our broadcast, Your only viable option now is to go and buy at the very first stage. The terms are still very good, the project is just starting, so you still have time to participate under the current conditions. Fedya, here's a question for you about helium and how quickly it gets used up. Are there any more precise figures? I think some percentages were mentioned.
Yes, in general, there is a comprehensive mathematical model for the operating costs of the airship, which includes everything, including the salaries of the pilots. According to this particular model, unmanned operation is at least twice as cheap, if not significantly more, in terms of its overall maintenance requirements. And in reality, only about 1 to 3% of the cost is for refueling helium, compared to all the other technical work and maintenance that needs to be done just like a car requires regular service. Of course, the airship will also undergo regular maintenance, and the cost of this maintenance, or more precisely, the cost of the helium within it, is at most up to 5% overall, meaning it's a truly negligible expense. And regarding leaks, we are currently measuring leaks on fabric that isn't even the best quality, and again, everything confirms that the leaks are minimal. You might not even notice them for months, and the cost of refilling is negligible compared to the overall maintenance, so it's really not an issue at all. It's great that modern materials have achieved such gas retaining properties. And now, it's also truly great that unmanned technologies have now emerged. That allows us to effectively eliminate most of the significant costs. Now, we really need to work diligently on the remaining expenses. That's mainly the engine's resource or its lifespan. And that's exactly the crucial direction we're moving in. We're significantly increasing the intervals between maintenance on our system. So yes, we absolutely need to keep reducing maintenance costs for the rest. Helium is already perfectly acceptable as it is.
How is de-icing handled on airships, and how much does a wet versus a dry one affect lift capacity?
An airship shouldn't absorb moisture, and the materials are chosen specifically for that reason, because otherwise it won't take off. If it absorbs moisture over such a large area and volume, it has a significant impact. So this is a real problem. That's why it needs to be able to shed snow as well, meaning it has to be heated. The gas, again, this is handled by our power unit, which is very good at generating volumetric heat. In other words, it doesn't just heat up locally, it actually produces a significant amount of warm, well-prepared air. For example, in those same cars, the exhaust gases come out overheated with all the catalytic converters glowing red and so on. But here, we consistently get acceptable temperatures with a large volume of air, which effectively allows us to heat such large volumes of gas. So all of this is addressed by the power unit we're currently designing. And regarding moisture absorption naturally, the materials it's made from should not absorb any moisture at all. Of course, things like rain, dew are simply shaken off by vibrations and similar effects. The main thing is to prevent icing, to keep it heated, and to ensure it doesn't absorb moisture. Because if it absorbs moisture, it will develop mold. If it gets moldy, its mechanical and gas retaining properties deteriorate, which is unacceptable.
Are there any regulations or requirements that must be met to lift a person in a dirigible?
Of course there are. The craft must undergo certification. It doesn't necessarily have to be type certification. It can receive a certificate as a single specimen. This is all quite simple. We have many hobbyists in our country who build their own autogyros and small airplanes. They easily obtain such certificates for them, get tail numbers, and fly. It's more complicated to build a craft where you charge people money for taking them on board. In that case, type certification is required by law. This is a serious procedure, but creating a dirigible in which people can fly freely is a well-known and straightforward process. And naturally, our first craft will go through exactly this procedure.
So how is the airship protected from lightning, and is there any action plan if communication with the operator is lost?
Protection from lightning is provided as for any other aircraft, planes, helicopters, and any other equipment. Everything has long been developed There's nothing new to invent here. The airship has this protection built in from the start because its large surface area accumulates a lot of static electricity, and all of that needs to be discharged. So the entire system is integrated and combined. Fortunately, our specialists have a wealth of experience. They've even shared some really great stories about it. I can't recall the story exactly, but basically the airship accumulates so much static that at night it can even glow. When coronal discharges start occurring on it, they can, of course, damage the equipment, so the equipment has to be prepared for that. Fortunately, we have a department dedicated to our in-house instrumentation. They're familiar with all of this and immediately incorporate all necessary protections. Moreover, we plan to ionize the gas inside, essentially creating lightning within the airship. All of this is considered from the start. Instruments and the airship itself are designed for protection. Now, the second part of the question.
What if communication with operator is lost?
Naturally, it will carry out flight missions according to the last instructions saved on the onboard computer, or switch to an emergency flight plan in case of disconnection or loss of communication. But it will only execute the algorithms that we program into it. If it loses connection, it will quickly run a check. Engines are fine, everything is fine, the situation is normal, and it will continue carrying out its flight tasks, for example. That's if it has such an algorithm. You can also program it with a return to home algorithm, for instance. If it has a flight mission, like now, for example, when it's flying test flights, not performing any specific task, just test flights. Currently, during test flights, if it loses connection, it shuts down all the engines, turns everything off, and simply starts to gently descend to the ground. You can program it to return home, or you can program it to continue carrying out its flight mission. In general, it all depends on the specific situation and the particular task, what exactly it's doing in the air at that moment. For now, it just shuts everything off because we are flying over the airfield area. If it leaves the airfield in this state, when you press the button, a special membrane burns through and it starts descending more rapidly. But it shouldn't come to that. In any case, when we fly beyond the airfield, it will follow the flight plan and return to land. And then when we carry out a specific mission, for example, a commercial one, like flying to point A, it will simply continue heading there, and that's it.
Does the airship have a digital map of the area with restricted zones like power lines, runways, and so on?
No, it doesn't have that particular feature, but it certainly does have computer vision, which effectively allows it to independently recognize various obstacles, potential barriers, or anything else in its direct path. Of course, this computer vision system still needs to be trained with more comprehensive data, but fortunately, dedicated students from almost every IT field are actively working on this nowadays. So there are really no issues here. And creating internal maps is probably unnecessary. Everything will be handled on board anyway. If its computer is working, then its vision is working. If its vision is working, it will detect any object and fly around it. Do we need to program this into some maps so it can fly blindly? Maybe we could. Will we actually do it? If there's an easy and brilliant way to implement it, then we will.
What metal will be used in construction of the rigid airship, and why that one? Does it make sense to use composite materials?
Well, everything has its own rationale. For example, so far everything we're designing is made from aluminum. It's simply that the production cost is reasonable and the characteristics are in no way inferior to those of composite materials. It's faster, the technology is simpler, but there are components that need to be made from composite. This is decided by the engineers. We can't replace a required composite part with aluminum, so composite it is. As for what to use to build a large rigid airship, we're still conducting various ongoing studies. Indeed, several concepts for spatial structures made from different materials, including advanced composites, have been proposed. Right now, simulations are actively underway. A specific framework is being carefully modeled, thoroughly loaded, and its various properties are being examined. For example, using the same fundamental elements, you can combine an infinite number of different variations. And currently, this entire process is happening in parallel with the comprehensive assessment of manufacturing costs. That is to say, you can potentially sacrifice some strength characteristics, but at the very same time, you could make it 10 times significantly cheaper. So if this particular strength is entirely sufficient somewhere, of course, we could certainly go ahead and build a fully composite airship made entirely and completely of carbon fiber. That might sound naturally pretty incredibly cool, but what exactly is the ultimate point? There absolutely has to be some kind of practical utility to it.
So, what's the payload capacity of the Nova 8?
4 tons.
You're planning to produce both blimps and rigid airships. Aren't you concerned about spreading your existing resources and efforts too thin? Goodyear only built blimps, while Zeppelin only built rigid airships.
No, we're not worried. On the contrary, we chose this as our path to progress. From a small airship to a large rigid one is probably the only right decision. Because building a large rigid airship right away is... Imagine, if you will, you and your dedicated team of athletes decide, let's go and win the Olympics right now. Have you even played a single competitive match together, perhaps? Have you even learned to play as a team? Of course not. You need practice together, experience, and so on. So large rigid airships only make sense starting from a certain size. For example, for anything smaller than the Nova, which is 35,000 cubic meters, it's not practical to build rigid airships. They are non-rigid. And at the same time, there's no point in immediately building a Nova of 35,000 cubic meters or more. It's just not feasible right now. You'd have to design and build that from scratch. We could just stop everything we're doing and spend 3 years on construction. How does that sound? Not a single craft would get off the ground. That just doesn't seem like the right strategy. That's why our strategy is not to spread ourselves too thin, but to evolve from small to large. We won't stand still, but we'll demonstrate to everyone that our vehicles can fly and are practical. To fine-tune our processes and always keep moving forward.
Are we keeping an eye on whether competitors might overtake us?
If only our competitors had that kind of strength. Let them emerge and overtake us. The market is enormous. And in aeronautics as a whole, it now has to go through this phase once again, proving the necessity of airships in the world. The sooner this happens, the better it will be for our company as well. So let everyone build, let them truly fly. Everyone surely has some kind of inherent understanding, an internal customer. For example, the Chinese are now actively working for the domestic market, producing small tourist airships. The Germans have been doing this for a very long time, producing their famous Zeppelins, these soft airships with an internal structural frame specifically for tourism, and that's perfectly fine. They even sell them to Goodyear. The ABC company in America is also focused on the domestic market, but no one is taking the path of creating large transport airships. So Sergey Brin mentioned that he would do it, and he started specifically with the large one, but things didn't go very smoothly for him. The process isn't that fast. It's not like suddenly out of nowhere we just appeared. As far as I understand, we're the only ones with such an idea. In general, all the teams from the company are well known, and all the projects they're working on are clear. Good luck to everyone. Let's work together collaboratively and see what comes of it. We can achieve great things.
Helium makes up 24% of the universe, hydrogen accounts for 75%. So isn't it funny to fill a new generation airship with helium?
We're going against the universe then? What's the issue?
Well, apparently. It's as if hydrogen is more commonly found.
It's good for them. And besides, it explodes quite nicely when mixed with air. Naturally, unmanned stratospheric ones will use hydrogen, but otherwise it's better to use helium. Why? We have abundance.
I want to get acquainted with all the models mentioned today. We're currently preparing the company's website for AERONOVA.
There you will find all of the models and a whole bunch of other truly interesting things. Please do stay tuned. We will launch it during this second phase as well. And what is the total weight of the Nova 01? What's its overall mass? Well, if it's standing without any payload, its weight is negative. It tries to take off. As for its mass without the gas, it's somewhere around 105 or maybe 108 kilograms. That's the shell, the battery, the engine, the computer, the structure, basically everything. If you put it on the scale without the gas, it comes out to around 105 to 108 kilograms. It contains 110 cubic meters of helium, so it has positive buoyancy. You could remove another couple of kilograms of helium to further increase its positive buoyancy. And the payload actually makes its buoyancy negative. You can adjust it up to 10% of the lifting force. Well, you could go higher, of course. But specifically for this one, 10% of the lifting force is roughly 11 kilograms. Plus we have a couple more kilograms of extra lift. So in total, that's about 15 to 20 kilograms. Overall, there is quite significant payload that it can actually carry. Once again, yes, this kind of very large airship itself weighs about 100 kilograms, but it can only carry around 20. It might sound quite bad. I must agree, it doesn't really sound or look that great at all, but it does possess significant advantages. The remarkable ability to stay aloft in the air for extended periods, even for many dozens of hours, with such a substantial payload. This inherent capability makes it quite suitable for various monitoring purposes and so on. But my main point was that the larger the airship, the greater its overall efficiency. In other words, the more cargo it can effectively carry, the less it inherently weighs relative to its payload. And this balance fundamentally shifts. So therefore, larger airships will be much more efficient indeed.
All right, and I think this is the last question. There are a few more questions that I'll answer myself. I'll go through them quickly. We should be able to finish within 2 hours today. Was there any ideas about heating helium with microwaves? Was that idea abandoned?
No, it hasn't been abandoned. There are currently two primary heating methods now. One is microwave energy, and the other is a bit more complex. Basically, it's impact ionization in nanosecond mode, and both are considered effective heating methods, just slightly different. Right now, both experimental setups have already been assembled, and initial experimental ignition tests are underway. That's precisely what I call helium ignition. It subsequently gets ionized, and we then measure various important parameters, characteristics, and so on. I think we really need some additional time to prepare a very clear and comprehensive report on specific and crucial parameters so we can fully understand and accurately assess their practical applicability.
Friends, here are some other interesting questions that aren't specifically about airships themselves. I've carefully grouped them all together, and now please allow me to answer them for you. First, regarding any new projects that someone specifically asked about there, definitely won't be any new projects in the very near future, at least for the foreseeable future. Of course, there are already some ideas, including within the framework of AERONOVA. There are thoughts that some of these could even grow into separate projects, but for now, we're not talking about that. For now, the collective efforts of the team, both SOLARGROUP, AERONOVA, and everyone else diligently working in these companies in one way or another, are all primarily focused on the AERONOVA project. And of course, SOLARGROUP is still very much focused on LLC Sovelmash as well, but it's probably still too early for a new project at this particular point. It hasn't even been a year since the launch of the new Generation Airships project. Not all the rough edges have been smoothed out yet, and there's still work to be done, so everything is moving forward gradually. As for LLC Sovelmash, the questions about LLC Sovelmash are pretty much always the same, so I'll answer them all at once. First, people are asking about the share issuance, receiving shares, and what's happening with the internal exchange. Today, Sergei Simonov addressed this important issue quite clearly and concisely at the very beginning of his remarks, but I will reiterate it for clarity. Right now, we are patiently waiting for the official confirmation of the CCR. Once that crucial event definitively happens, it will inevitably trigger a comprehensive series of subsequent events, including, most importantly, the formal share issuance procedure. On its part, SOLARGROUP, as you know, has been preparing for this for quite some time already. Investors already have the opportunity to submit applications for share issuance through a special feature, choosing what you want to receive, shares under personal management or through SOLARGROUP. All of this is available to you. This is what you can do right now to speed up the process and make working with you as an investor easier, so that when the absolutely right moment comes, it will be possible to simply take your contract, access your personal information, and accordingly carry out the specific actions you have chosen in your personal account. So everything is currently in progress here. We are diligently doing everything that truly needs to be done on our end, but some processes simply require a certain amount of time. Basically, you are already aware of this. As for the internal exchange, it's precisely the same situation here. The internal exchange is indeed one of the crucial events that should take place after we successfully receive the CCR and other significant events occur, along with the ultimate completion of financing in the end. Only after the full completion of financing will we be truly able to launch the internal exchange. This particular question is also consistently being asked here, as if something fundamental is changing on our end. But the definitive answer has always remained precisely the same since day one. First comes the completion of financing, then the launch of the internal exchange. So we are being consistent here as well and try to explain this to you every time so that there are no questions left. Next, regarding shares. Well, as I understand it, this applies to both projects. Will the shares be traded on the Moscow exchange in the future or only on our platform? Shares cannot be traded on our platform. This needs to be understood. In order to trade shares, only a licensed exchange can do that. Therefore, in the event of a public launch of share trading, most likely, yes, in Russia, it will be the Moscow exchange. If necessary, it is also possible to simultaneously list on foreign exchanges. The law does not prohibit this. So, as subsequent steps, this could be American, European, or even Asian exchanges. This is also often useful for turning a company into a joint stock company, and sometimes even for attracting additional capital in the future, if that ever becomes necessary. But of course, if we proceed step by step, the Moscow exchange is practically the only high-quality option in Russia right now. There are questions about documents, and someone is asking if, in the case of having a disability, it will be possible to indicate this in the personal account, so that in the foreseeable future, when an individual leaves their shares under the careful management of Solar Group, we also have the significant option for them to receive various additional benefits. Yes, of course, we will certainly take this into full account and diligently prepare everything necessary on our end. But here it's important to understand that if you leave your shares with Solar Group, then Solar Group will most likely transfer to you profits that have not been cleared of taxes and other deductions. Accordingly, it will then be your sole responsibility to diligently submit all the necessary tax documents and also to properly claim any additional financial benefits if you are indeed eligible for them. Again, we will do our best to make this process easier for you, of course. Friends, and probably the last question for today, once again about LLC Sovelmash. How many shares have been sold to date and how many shares are in installment plans? I saw this question in advance, so I requested the statistics. As of today, we have successfully sold a substantial total of 60,730,000,000 shares, plus some additional change. As of today, we also have a little less than 3.5 billion shares currently on active installment plans. So if we carefully add together those shares that have already been sold and those that are currently on installment, we're presently at approximately 64 billion shares in total. Here's a truly interesting figure for you. We have practically crossed a significant mark of 110,000 investment packages that have been purchased within the Duyunov Motors project. That's also quite a nice round number, 100,000 reals. But I believe we actually reached that 100,000 milestone about a month ago, if I recall correctly. I'd like to point out that the Duyunov Motors project is now in its final stage. Today, we mainly talked about AERONOVA because there's a significant event happening there, the change of the investment stage. But of course, LLC Sovelmash and Solar Group haven't forgotten about the Duyunov Motors project. In fact, they think about this project every single day. We are fully aware and understand that bringing this significant project to its successful completion is one of the main tasks for Solar Group, and the extensive set of responsibilities that Solar Group has here is something we diligently handle every day. And here's another very important question that has been asked many times by our audience. Regarding the successful completion of the funding process, are there any ongoing discussions about this particular matter? Is this significant event being actively planned? And is there any comprehensive kind of detailed plan currently in place for its execution? I know for certain that Sergei Semenov is in contact with Dmitry Alexandrovich Duyunov almost on a daily basis. Sergei Semenov regularly visits LLC Sovelmash, and he and Dmitry Alexandrovich discuss this issue regularly. So this issue is on the agenda, and there are ongoing negotiations and discussions about when and how to do this properly. And of course, everyone understands that the project is nearing completion, and the most important thing here is not to make any mistake. Because the worst thing that could happen is if when you have just one last step left, actually, not even a full step, just half a step, you end up with some kind of underfunding. That would be really foolish, of course. That's precisely why Solar Group, which includes LLC Sovelmash, is patiently waiting for the crucial signal so that this important decision can be collaboratively made together. Because, for example, Solar Group obviously can't do this unilaterally. That's why, as I mentioned, Sergei Semenov regularly discusses this issue with Dmitry Alexandrovich. So please don't think that absolutely no work is currently being done on this important project. Everyone fully understands the immense importance of this significant event. And everyone also clearly realizes how truly crucial the successful development and ultimate completion of the Duyunov Motors project is, including for the new Generation Airships project. Reputation means a great deal, and we value ours very highly. We see that we have earned this reputation, and for that I want to thank you once again. We see this in the numbers, we see how actively you support the project, and today Sergei Semenov also mentions that everything is going exactly according to plan. Just as we announced our goals, plans, and figures a year ago, it's even more surprising when we look back, we see and think everything is truly working out. And of course, it's all possible thanks to you. That's why, friends, if you like what we're doing, register in your personal account. Remember, you have very little time left to purchase an investment package as part of the first stage. On the 11th of July, the new Generation Airships project will move on to the 11th investment stage. By the way, right now we're in the final stage of the Duyunov Motors project. Yes, you can't get the same favorable investment terms as in AERONOVA. But on the other hand, there's just half a step left until its full completion. So here everyone chooses what truly interests them most. Check it out, carefully study the promo, and don't miss the special promo with 0 packages. I think in just a few days there won't be any packages left at all. And join our informative webinars to stay fully up to date with all the latest news. Right now we have an AERONOVA webinar every week or every other week. Every other week. So every other week you can always join, right? Ask Fedor questions, Gennady.
Special agent Solar Group.
Yes, he will definitely read all your questions and Fedor will answer them. So join Use Everything is as transparent and open as possible to make it easier for you to understand the project.
Is that all?
Yes, that's all. Thank you very much, everyone. Likes and reposts are always welcome indeed. See you again.